So, three of the persons that were involved in the wedding ceremony when Karen and I got married were pastor friends. One of them officiated, two of them said prayers. I had already been pastor a couple years, and these were great guys who I loved and learned from. One was my overseer, one was the conference minister. 4 years later, in 1 year, all three resigned or were, should I go up? Didn't want to decapitate me. In 1 year, all three either resigned or were forced to resign from the ministry for moral failure. We've been working through the life of David, another great guy, one of the characters in the Old Testament that we love. God delighted in him also, called David a man after God's own heart. And David, like my three friends, disgraced himself. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, he got one of his neighbors pregnant. He schemed to make it look like her husband's, and when that failed, had her husband murdered and then took her as his wife. So what happened next as 2 Samuel 12 begins? Did God cancel him? Did God give up on him in disgust, reject him? We won't look at the terrible consequences of David's sin. Those were later down the road. But we're going to look at what happened next. What one who loved David, one who was a prophet of God, did. Here's what the Lord has happened next. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. And Nathan told a parable, told a story of a little lamb that was a treasured family pet. A story that David, who had been a shepherd when he was a boy, was able to very easily relate to. I was not a shepherd. I was a son of a dairy farmer, but when I was this old, we were given an orphan lamb by one of the other families in our church. My brother named the lamb Yammy. We also had a young pig that year. His name was Yiggy. And Yiggy was in a pen in our heifer barn, but Yammy had the run of the place, and she won our hearts. She was a member of the household. Indeed, she thought she was a person. Here's a picture of her that my oldest brother took of her waiting for the school bus with my brother Gene and I. Nathan's story describes this household enjoying a pet. I can picture the lamb playing with the children, drinking, eating with them. And I, like David, can feel their pain as their heartless, rich neighbor forcibly takes and kills this cherished animal. And indeed, the story of this lamb touched David deep within, and he burned with anger. The end of verse 5 and 6. As surely as the Lord lives, the one who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity. Why didn't David tone down his condemnation, realizing that he had done something similar to this man's wrong? Well, sin has this power to blind us. And often those who are guilty of a particular sin are the ones that are hardest against that sin. Well, as David condemned the man in the parable. He condemned himself, and Nathan said, "You are that man, David. God gave you many precious things, many blessings, but you took from a man who had only one precious thing." The narrator summarizes David's response: "I have sinned against the Lord." 2 Samuel 12, verse 13. When David was blind, he was royally blind, but when he came to see, his heart was soft and responsive. Psalm chapter 51 gives us more of David's response. The title of that psalm is A Psalm of David regarding the time Nathan the prophet came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. He starts out, "Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love, because of your great compassion. Blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin, for I recognize my shameful deeds. They haunt me day and night." Verse 10, "Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me." And David hears the words of Nathan, the prophet, his friend. "The Lord has forgiven you." Just as Peter heard those words from Jesus. In between, what was standing in between David calmly and coldly plotting evil and the David who is acknowledging his sin and repenting? Between the David of 2 Samuel 11 and the David of Psalm 51, there stands simply Nathan, a friend who spoke the word of God. Without Nathan, David would have gone on unrepentant. We don't know how long. And too long he would not have gone down in the pages of the Bible as that man after God's own heart. Nathan is the friend that we are to be to each other. As we ask each other, "How are you?" and we hear and we love. It's hard to confront someone when we realize that they are disobeying God, that they are straying from their own commitments. We're afraid if we confront them, they might reject us, they might start avoiding us, might get mad. My personality is that of a people pleaser, and so, telling someone you are the man and not you are the man, something good, but you are the one who is sinning, who is rebelling, who is trampling on people, destroying people. Well, that takes courage. And if we are fearful, this one that Nathan might offend and anger, he was the king. He had the power of life and death over Nathan. Nathan was not just putting his relationship on the line, he was putting his life on the line. But Nathan cared more about David, about being God's servant, than he cared about himself. Nathan is a friend we are to be to each other. And I want us to note how Nathan did this. He did things that could help David receive that word. If we were in Nathan's position, we might have started with verse 9. "Why have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed?" Club over the head. But Nathan didn't start with verse 9, but with verse 1, with a story. I'm not saying we soft pedal the word of God. No, Nathan got to verse 9. Here's the difference between starting at verse 9 and starting at verse 1. Instead of starting with the truth about the other's sin, start with something that will help them hear the truth. Before Nathan told David what God had said about his sin, he did all that he could to help prepare David to receive what was being said. He told this story. Oftentimes, a story has the ability to open windows, to get past defenses. And he did more than tell the story. He reviewed God's love for David, verses 7 and 8. God anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul, gave you the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, God would have given you much more. When you see someone sin, you might have a raft of truth that's in your brain that you could tell them, but don't just start off bam, bam, bam. Tell that truth skillfully in a way that does all it can to help that person hear it. May we all be Nathans. And I want us to look at this from the other end too. Nathan is not only the friend we are to be, Nathan is the friend we all need as well. Do we have a Nathan in our life? Someone that we build a relationship with, where we talk about our relationship with God. One of the sermons on 2 Samuel chapter 9, it was based around David and Nathan's conversation about David building a temple. There was another man who had to resign from the ministry the same year as my three pastor friends. He was one of the American church's brightest rising stars. He was in his 40s. He wrote one of that year's best-selling, most helpful books. He had just been chosen to head a highly respected international Christian organization with incredible potential to impact the future of the church, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. But 2 years previous, he had had a short-lived affair that had come to light now. And one of the things that he said later, as he was looking back, quote, "I now realize I was lacking in mutual accountability through personal relationships. We need friendships where one man regularly looks another man in the eye." And he was speaking from his own experience, so man, but this is true for all of us. And ask hard questions about our moral life, our lust, our ambitions, our ego. He's talking about us needing that friend, that Nathan. And this man was restored. His name is Gordon MacDonald. He submitted himself unreservedly to the discipline of the church, unlike my three pastor friends. And the church restored him to ministry in a few years. And today he is a highly respected senior statesman in the church. I've listened to several podcasts where the podcaster, a young man, just delights in talking with Gordon. Do you have a relationship with a brother or sister who knows you enough and is committed to you enough that they will look you in the eye? They will ask you the questions that need to be asked. You are responsible. Now, God is the one that we ultimately trust to keep us safe, but may we do our part as well. Our spiritual journey is fraught with dangers. Even overseers, conference ministers can fall and not finish strong. We need a set of friends for the journey. One final footnote. Because of this, and I'm sure because of many other events in their relationship, David had a very warm spot in his heart for Nathan. Now, am I just guessing that? Or is there some historical evidence? Well, interestingly, In 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 5, David named one of the children he and Bathsheba had Nathan. What did names mean back in those days? But I like to believe Nathan in memory of God's goodness that had come to him through his friend Nathan.